The roar of the crowd was deafening, but Adrian Zane could hear only one voice cutting through the bloodthirsty, a female orc screaming his name with a desperation that tore at his soul as he stepped barefoot and unarmed into the fighting pit, the sand still dark with yesterday's blood. 3 days ago, Adrian had been a free man traveling the frontier roads as a merchant's guard, his sword sharp and his coin purse moderately full. Now he was a prisoner sentenced to die for the entertainment of Baron Helmuth's court, and the only person in this God's forsaken arena who seemed to care whether he lived or died was Grusha, the orc woman who had been thrown into the cells beneath the arena alongside him. Her voice rose above the jeering crowd, raw and frantic, calling his name over and over as the gate on the opposite side of the pit began to rise with an ominous grinding of chains. Adrian's eyes swept the crowd until he found her chained to the viewing platform where the other prisoners were forced to watch the executions, her green skin gleaming with sweat, her small tusks bared not in aggression but in anguish. Their eyes met across the distance, and for a moment the world narrowed to just that connection. Then something massive and snarling emerged from the darkness beyond the rising gate, and Adrian had to tear his gaze away to face his death. The creature was a razorback bear, 12 feet of muscle and fury with tusks longer than daggers and claws that could disembowel a man with a single swipe. The crowd's roar intensified as the beast caught Adrian's scent and charged, shaking the ground with each thunderous step. Adrian had no weapons. They had stripped him of everything: his sword, his leather armor, even his boots. He wore only the thin linen pants they had given him, as if to make the spectacle of his death more pathetic. But Adrian had not survived 10 years as a soldier, and 5 more guarding merchant caravans through orc territory and bandit-infested wilderness by relying solely on steel. His mind was his sharpest weapon, and even now, facing impossible odds, it worked with cold precision. The razorback bear closed the distance in seconds. Adrian waited until the last possible moment, until he could smell the beast's rancid breath and see the rage in its yellow eyes. Then he threw himself sideways and rolled. The bear's momentum carried it past him, its claws gouging deep furrows in the sand where Adrian had been standing a heartbeat before. The crowd gasped, then booed. They wanted blood, not acrobatics. Adrian scrambled to his feet, his mind racing. The pit was circular, perhaps 50 feet across, with walls 20 feet high made of smooth stone that offered no handholds. Scattered across the sand were bones from previous victims and rusted weapons too damaged to be useful. The bear wheeled around with surprising speed for something so massive, saliva dripping from its jaws as it prepared for another charge. "Adrian," Grusha's voice cut through the noise again, and despite the mortal danger, Adrian felt something warm kindle in his chest. In the 3 days they had spent in adjacent cells, waiting for their turn in the arena, they had talked through the bars that separated them. She had told him of her clan in the northern mountains, of how she had been captured by slavers while hunting alone. He had told her of his years in the king's army, of the friends he had lost in the border wars, of his weariness with violence. They had shared water when the guards forgot to bring enough, passed scraps of bread back and forth, and sat in companionable silence during the long, dark hours. He had not expected to care about an orc. His whole life, he had been taught that orcs were monsters, enemies of humanity, creatures to be feared and fought. But Grusha had challenged every assumption. She was intelligent, thoughtful, and possessed a quiet strength that had nothing to do with her considerable physical power. When she had learned that Adrian was to be sent into the pit first, she had gripped the bars between their cells with both hands, her knuckles turning pale green with the pressure, and made him promise to survive. "You fight," she had said, her voice fierce. "You are strong. You are clever. You do not give up. Promise me." He had promised, though they both knew it was likely a lie. But now, hearing her scream his name as if her voice alone could shield him from harm, Adrian found himself determined to make that promise true. The razorback bear charged again, and this time Adrian ran toward it instead of away, sliding beneath its massive bulk at the last second. His hand closed around something half buried in the sand, a femur, thick and heavy. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. He rolled to his feet and spun to face the bear, which had crashed into the arena wall with enough force to crack the stone. The beast recovered quickly and circled him now, more cautious, its small eyes calculating. Adrian kept the bone held low, not threatening, analyzing the animal's movements. The bear favored its left front leg slightly, an old injury perhaps, or strain from its captivity. Its ribs showed through its mangy fur. The Baron's handlers had starved it to make it more aggressive, which made it dangerous, but also potentially weaker. Adrian feinted left, and when the bear shifted to intercept, he noticed the moment of hesitation on that injured leg. It was not much, but it was something. The crowd was growing restless, shouting for action. Some threw rotten fruit into the pit, though whether aimed at him or the bear, Adrian could not tell. The bear lunged, and Adrian met it with the bone, jamming it into the creature's open mouth as those massive jaws came down. Teeth splintered the bone, but it bought Adrian precious seconds to roll away from the claws. The bear shook its head, dislodging the remnants of the bone, and roared in fury. Blood flecked its muzzle where the splintered bone had cut its gums. Adrian, the wall, the chain. Grush's voice, urgent and commanding. Adrian risked a glance and saw what she meant. On the wall where the bear had crashed, one of the torch brackets had been knocked loose, its chain hanging down about 15 feet above the ground. If he could reach it, if he could climb fast enough, he might gain a momentary advantage. But that meant turning his back on the bear and running, trusting that he could move faster than the creature could strike. It was a tremendous risk, but remaining on the ground with no weapons was certain death. Adrian made his decision in a heartbeat. He sprinted for the wall, his bare feet digging into the sand for purchase. Behind him, he heard the bear's roar and the thunder of its charge. The crowd's noise swelled to a fever pitch. 20 feet. 15. He could hear the bear's breathing, feel the vibration of its steps through the ground. 10 feet. 5. He leaped, his hands closing around the hanging chain, and pulled himself up with all the strength his arms possessed. The bear's claws raked the air inches below his feet. Adrian climbed hand over hand, his muscles screaming with the effort, until he reached the bracket and could brace himself against the wall. The bear reared up on its hind legs, swiping at him, but even fully extended, it could not quite reach. Adrian clung to the wall, chest heaving, and allowed himself one precious moment to think. The bear could not climb. That gave him time, but not much. The crowd was in an uproar, some cheering his cleverness, others howling in outrage that their entertainment was being delayed. In the Baron's box, Adrian could see the fat noble leaning forward, his face red with drink and displeasure. A gesture from the Baron, and the handlers would release another creature or find some other way to force Adrian down. Adrian. Grush's voice again, but different now, not panicked but urgent with purpose. The torch. Use the torch. Adrian looked at the bracket he clung to. The torch had fallen when the bear struck the wall, but the bracket itself was made of iron, and the bolts holding it to the stone were loose from the impact. If he could work it free, he would have a weapon with reach and weight. It was a slim chance, but better than nothing. He wedged his feet against the wall and used both hands to wrench at the bracket. Below, the bear circled and roared, occasionally rearing up to swipe at him. The bracket groaned but held. Adrian adjusted his grip and pulled harder, ignoring the pain in his shoulders, the burning in his muscles. The crowd's jeering faded to a dull roar in his ears. There was only the bracket, the wall, the bear, and Grush's voice calling encouragement. With a shriek of tortured metal, the bracket came free. Adrian nearly lost his grip as it did, swinging wildly on the chain for a moment before he could stabilize himself. The bracket was heavy iron, perhaps 3 feet long with a hook on one end and the mounting bolts protruding from the other. Not a sword, but it would do. The problem now was getting down. The bear waited below, patient in the way of predators that know their prey has nowhere to go. Adrian's arms were already tired from the climb and the effort of freeing the bracket. He could not stay on the chain forever. He looked toward Grusha again, and found her watching him with an intensity that bordered on desperate. Even from this distance, he could see the dried blood on her face from where the guards had struck her earlier, the bruises on her arms from the manacles. She had been scheduled for the pit tomorrow, to face whatever horror the Baron deemed fit for an orc woman who had dared fight back against her captors. The injustice of it burned in Adrian's chest alongside something else, something he had not expected to feel in what he assumed would be his final hours. He did not want to die, not because he feared death itself, but because dying would mean leaving Grusha alone to face her own doom. In 3 days, she had become more important to him than people he had known for years. Perhaps it was the proximity of death that made emotions more intense, more immediate. Or perhaps it was simply that Grusha, with her fierce dignity and unexpected kindness, had shown him a glimpse of what life could be beyond the violence and prejudice that had defined his existence for so long. The Baron made another gesture, and the handlers opened a second gate. 3 wild dogs, starved and vicious, poured into the arena. They immediately began barking and snarling at the bear, which turned to face this new threat. It was the distraction Adrian needed. He dropped from the chain, his knees buckling with the impact but his grip firm on the iron bracket. The dogs and the bear were locked in a vicious melee on the far side of the pit, a confusion of fur and teeth and blood. Adrian did not hesitate. He ran for the nearest wall, searching for anything else he could use to his advantage. One of the dogs broke away from the fight, spotting easier prey, and came for Adrian with foam dripping from its jaws. Adrian met its charge with a swing of the bracket, catching the animal in the ribs with the full force of his desperation. The dog yelped and fell, twitching. Adrian did not stop moving. The bear had killed 1 dog already and was tearing into the second. That left 1 more dog, and then the bear's full attention would return to him. Adrian's eyes swept the arena and caught on something half buried near the center, the glint of metal. He sprinted for it while the remaining dog was still distracted by the bear. His fingers closed around a broken spear shaft, the head rusted but still sharp. Now he had 2 weapons, 1 for each hand. The bear finished with the dogs and turned its blood-soaked muzzle toward Adrian. They circled each other, both breathing hard. Both wounded the bear from the dog's teeth, Adrian from a gash on his leg he had not noticed receiving. The sand beneath his feet was dark with blood, and the crowd had grown strangely quiet, leaning forward to watch the final confrontation. "You can do this," Grusha shouted, her voice breaking. "Adrian, you can do this." The bear charged, and Adrian set his feet and held his ground. At the last possible moment, he sidestepped and drove the spear into the bear's injured front leg, then followed through with the bracket to the creature's skull. The bear's momentum carried it past him, but it was staggering now, roaring in pain and rage. Adrian pulled the spear free and struck again and again, targeting the injured leg, the ribs, anywhere that might weaken the beast. The fight was not elegant. It was desperate and brutal and ugly. Adrian took a glancing blow from the bear's paw that sent him sprawling, the bracket flying from his grip. The bear lunged for him, and Adrian rolled and came up with only the spear, driving it up under the bear's jaw as those massive jaws came down toward his face. The spear went deep, and the bear's eyes went wide. For a long moment they were frozen like that Adrian on his back, the spear braced against the ground and angled up into the bear's brain, the creature's weight slowly pressing down. Then the light went out of the bear's eyes, and the massive body went limp. Adrian shoved with all his remaining strength, rolling the corpse off him, and lay gasping in the blood-soaked sand, scarcely able to believe he was still alive. The crowd erupted. Some cheered, excited by the unexpected outcome. Others booed, having lost wagers on his death. In the Baron's box, Helmuth's face was purple with rage. Adrian struggled to his feet, swaying, and looked up at Grusha. She was weeping openly, her hands gripping the railing of the prisoner's platform, her whole body shaking. Their eyes met across the distance, and Adrian saw in her face everything he felt in his own heart: relief, joy, and something deeper that neither of them had yet named. "Return him to the cells," the Baron shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. "And bring out the orc woman. Let us see if she fights as well as she cheers." "No." Adrian's voice was raw but carried across the arena. "No, she fights tomorrow, not today. Those were your rules, Baron. Each prisoner gets their turn. I have had mine. She gets hers tomorrow." The Baron's eyes narrowed. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind blowing through the arena, carrying with it the copper smell of blood. Then Helmuth smiled, a cruel expression that made Adrian's stomach clench. "Very well," the Baron said. "Tomorrow it is. Take them both back to the cells. But chain them separately. I will not have them planning escapes or other such nonsense." The guards came and dragged Adrian from the arena, his legs barely supporting him. As they hauled him through the gate, he caught one last glimpse of Grusha being pulled in the opposite direction, toward a different cell block. She was shouting something, but the guards struck her, and then Adrian was in the dark corridors beneath the arena, and he could hear nothing but his own ragged breathing. They threw him into a new cell, smaller and damper than before, without even the narrow window that had let in light. The door slammed shut with a finality that echoed in Adrian's bones. He crawled to the corner and let himself collapse, every muscle in his body screaming, the wound on his leg bleeding steadily onto the stone floor. He had survived. Against all odds, he had survived. But Grusha would face the arena tomorrow, and the Baron would ensure she faced something even worse than a starved bear as punishment for Adrian's defiance. The thought was agony greater than any of his physical wounds. Adrian pressed his forehead against the cold stone and tried to think through the exhaustion and pain. He had to find a way out. Not just for himself, he could have perhaps accepted his own death, but he could not accept Grusha's. Not when she had given him a reason to fight, a reason to believe that there was something in this world worth surviving for. Hours passed in the darkness. Adrian drifted in and out of consciousness, feverish from his wounds. He dreamed of green skin and small tusks, of a voice calling his name, of eyes that looked at him without the hatred or fear he had come to expect from orcs. In his dreams, Grusha was free, running through mountain forests under a sky so blue it hurt to look at, and she was laughing. The sound of the cell door opening jolted him awake. Torchlight blinded him momentarily, and he raised a hand to shield his eyes. A guard stood silhouetted in the doorway, but there was something strange about his posture, the way he glanced over his shoulder as if nervous. "On your feet, prisoner," the guard said, but his voice was quiet, lacking the usual harsh edge. Adrian struggled upright, his leg nearly buckling. The guard stepped forward and, to Adrian's shock, offered his arm for support. "Quickly now," the guard whispered. "We do not have much time." "What is this?" Adrian asked, his voice hoarse. "A chance," the guard replied. "My name is Garrett. I was a soldier once, like you, fought in the border campaigns. I saw you in the pit today, saw how you fought. That took courage and skill. The Baron should have freed you, not sentenced you to another death tomorrow." "Another death?" Adrian's heart clenched. "They said Grusha fights tomorrow." "Both of you," Garrett said grimly. "The Baron changed his mind. Thought it would be more entertaining to have you fight together against multiple opponents. And if you happen to die trying to protect each other, well, that is just good theater." Adrian felt cold rage wash through him, burning away the fever fog. "Where are you taking me?" "To her," Garrett said. "I can give you 1 hour. 1 hour in the same cell to say whatever needs saying. After that, I return you here, and tomorrow you face the arena. I cannot do more without risking my family. The Baron would kill them if he knew I was doing even this much." Adrian wanted to demand more, to insist that Garrett help them escape, but he saw the truth in the guard's eyes. This man was risking everything to give them even this small mercy. "Thank you," Adrian said simply. "Thank you, Garrett." The guard led him through dark corridors, supporting Adrian's weight when his injured leg threatened to give out. They passed other cells where prisoners moaned or wept or sat in sullen silence. Finally, they stopped before a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands. 1 hour, Garrett repeated. He unlocked the door and helped Adrian through, then closed and locked it behind him. The cell was slightly larger than the one Adrian had left, with a single torch burning in a wall bracket that cast flickering shadows. And there, sitting against the far wall with her arms wrapped around her knees, was Grusha. She looked up at the sound of the door and her eyes went wide. "Adrian." He took one stumbling step toward her, and then she was on her feet and crossing the distance between them, catching him before he could fall. Her arms went around him, strong and sure, and for a moment they just held each other, both shaking. "I thought I would not see you again," Grusha said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "I thought they would keep us apart until tomorrow." "A guard showed mercy," Adrian said. He pulled back enough to look at her face, cataloging the new bruises, the split lip, the haunted look in her amber eyes. "Grusha, I am so sorry. This is my fault. If I had not spoken out, had not challenged the Baron, no," she interrupted fiercely. She cupped his face with both hands, her palms warm against his skin. "No, Adrian, you spoke truth. You showed courage. That is not something to apologize for." They moved to sit against the wall together, and Grusha carefully examined Adrian's wounds, tearing strips from her own shirt to bandage the worst of the gash on his leg. Her touch was gentle despite the strength in her hands, and Adrian found himself watching her face instead of what she was doing. "Why did you call my name?" he asked quietly. "In the arena, you kept calling my name." Grusha's hands stilled. She did not look up from the bandage she was tying. "Because I needed you to know someone cared," she said finally. "Because I needed you to fight, because the thought of you dying." She trailed off, her voice breaking. "I know," Adrian said softly. He reached out and tilted her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. "I know because I feel the same. These 3 days we have spent together, Grusha. I know it sounds insane, but you have become more important to me than people I have known for years. When I was in that pit, the only thing that kept me fighting was the thought of you having to face it alone." It does not sound insane, Grusha whispered. Her tusks caught the torchlight as she spoke, and Adrian found himself thinking how beautiful she was not despite her orcish features, but because of them, because they were part of what made her uniquely herself. Where I come from, we have a saying. The fire that burns brightest burns fastest, but it also sees farthest into the dark. Sometimes you do not have years to know someone. Sometimes you have only days or hours, and you must choose to either open your heart or die with it closed. I choose to open mine, Adrian said. Even if we die tomorrow, I want you to know I care for you, Grusha, more than I have cared for anyone in a very long time. You are brave and kind and fierce, and when I look at you, I do not see an orc. I see a woman who deserves so much better than the hand fate has dealt her. Grusha's eyes glistened with unshed tears. When I look at you, I see a good man. Not a human man, just a good man, which is rarer than any of your people want to admit. I see someone who keeps his promises, who fights even when there is no hope, who cares about a worthless orc prisoner enough to risk angering a baron. You are not worthless, Adrian said vehemently. Never say that. Never think that. My clan cast me out, Grusha said, and there was such pain in her voice that Adrian's heart ached. I was foolish, you see. Before the slavers took me, I had already been exiled. There was a human village near our territory. They had children who were starving because their crops had failed. I brought them food. Not much, just what I could spare from my own hunting. But my clan learned of it, and the elders said I had betrayed my people by showing mercy to humans. They said I was weak. They cast me out alone with nothing, and that is when the slavers found me. Adrian pulled her closer, and she came willingly, resting her head against his chest. Then your clan were fools, he said. Kindness is not weakness. What you did feeding those children, that took more courage than anything I did in the arena today. They sat in silence for a while, just holding each other, savoring the warmth of another person's presence. Finally, Grusha spoke again, her voice so quiet Adrian almost missed it. I do not want to die tomorrow. Then we will not die, Adrian said with more confidence than he felt. We will fight together and we will survive together, and then we will find a way to escape this place. How? Grusha asked, not challenging but genuinely asking, as if she trusted that he might have an answer. Adrian's mind raced. He thought about the arena, the layout, the gates, the guards. He thought about Garrett and the mercy the man had shown. He thought about the Baron's cruelty and arrogance. An idea began to form, desperate and dangerous but possible. The Baron wants a show, Adrian said slowly. He wants us to fight together to see if we will protect each other. What if we gave him a better show than he expects? What if we did not just survive? What if we won so decisively, so dramatically, that the crowd demands our freedom? The Baron does not have to listen to the crowd, Grusha pointed out. No, but he does have to maintain his reputation. If the crowd sees us as champions, as entertainment they want more of, he might keep us alive for future games. And if we are alive, we can escape. But if we just try to survive tomorrow, he will make sure whatever we face is too much, and we will die. Grusha considered this, her brow furrowed. You want us to fight as a team, to show strength together. More than that, I want us to fight with such coordination that it is beautiful. Fighters can become popular if they are skilled enough. If we become valuable to the Baron as entertainers, we buy time. Time for what? Time to plan. Time to find allies like Garrett. Time to learn the routines and the weaknesses in this place. Adrian pulled back to look at her directly. It is not a perfect plan, but it is better than accepting death. Grusha studied his face for a long moment, then nodded decisively. Then we fight together tomorrow. We show them what an orc and a human can do when they stand side by side instead of against each other. Tell me about orc fighting styles, Adrian said. I have fought against orcs in battle, but never alongside one. What are your strengths? They spent the next hour in deep discussion, sharing everything they knew about combat. Grusha described the techniques she had learned in her clan, how orcs relied on strength and endurance, how they worked as groups to bring down larger prey, the specific ways they used their lower center of gravity and powerful legs. Adrian explained human military tactics, the way soldiers created shield walls and protected each other's flanks, the importance of using speed to counter superior strength. By the time Garrett returned to collect Adrian, they had the outline of a plan. It was rough, and it depended on luck as much as skill, but it was something. More importantly, it gave them hope, which was a weapon all its own. "I will see you tomorrow," Adrian said as Garrett unlocked the door. He reached out and took Grusha's hand, squeezing it once. "Stay strong." "You too," Grusha said. Then, impulsively, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his, a gesture he somehow knew was significant in orc culture, though he could not say how he knew. "Fight well, Adrian Zane. Fight with me and for me, and I will do the same for you." Back in his own cell, Adrian lay awake for the few remaining hours until dawn, replaying every moment of their conversation, every plan they had made. His body ached and his wounds throbbed, but his mind was clear. He had something to fight for now, something beyond mere survival. When the guards came at dawn to drag him to the arena, Adrian went without resistance, his eyes searching the corridors for any sign of Grusha. They brought them both up separately, chaining Adrian to one side of the preparation area and Grusha to the other, far enough apart that they could see each other, but not speak. The sounds of the crowd filtered down through the stone, that hungry roar of people eager for blood. A handler approached Adrian, an oily man with a calculating expression. "The Baron has decided to give you weapons this time," he said. "Fair fighting, he calls it. Choose whatever you want from the racks, though I warn you it will not matter. What you face today will kill you no matter how well armed you are." Adrian surveyed the weapon racks. Most were cheap, poorly maintained, the kind of equipment no real warrior would choose. But there, near the back, he spotted something that made his heart leap, a military gladius standard issue for the king's army, worn but well made. He grabbed it along with a small buckler shield. Across the way, he saw Grusha choose a pair of shorter blades, one for each hand, and a weighted net weapons that would let her use her strength and speed. They were brought to the gate that led into the arena. For the first time that morning, they stood close enough to speak. "Whatever comes through that gate," Adrian said quietly, "we face it together. Remember what we planned. Stay close but give each other room to fight. Watch each other's backs. And Grusha, no matter what happens, know that meeting you was the best thing that happened to me in a very long time." Grusha's expression was fierce and tender all at once. "If we survive this, Adrian, I have things I want to say to you, things I want to show you. My mountains, I want to show you my mountains, where the air is so clean it hurts your lungs and the sky goes on forever." "Then we survive," Adrian said simply. "We survive, and you show me your mountains." The gate began to rise with that same ominous grinding of chains. Beyond it, the arena stretched out under the morning sun, the sand already raked clean of yesterday's blood. The crowd's roar intensified as Adrian and Grusha stepped forward together, side by side. The Baron's voice echoed across the arena, magically amplified. "Citizens of Helmuth's Hold, today we have a special entertainment. The human prisoner who survived the Razorback Bear and his orc companion will fight together against the finest warriors I have been able to assemble. Let us see if their unlikely partnership can withstand trained steel." 6 gates around the arena began to open simultaneously, and from each emerged a fighter. Not animals this time, but men gladiators from the look of them, professionals who fought for coin and glory. They were armored and armed, and they moved with the easy confidence of people who had killed many times before and expected to kill again today. Adrian felt Grusha tense beside him, but he reached out and briefly touched her hand. "Remember the plan," he murmured. "Defense first. Let them come to us. Tire them out." The gladiators were spreading out, trying to surround them. Adrian and Grusha moved to place their backs near the center of the arena, reducing the angles of attack. The crowd was chanting now, placing bets, waving ribbons of different colors to show their favorites. Adrian noticed that most of the ribbons were for the gladiators, but some, a surprisingly large number, were the plain white that signified support for the underdogs. The first attack came from two sides at once. Adrian met a sword thrust with his buckler and riposted with the gladius, not trying to kill but to measure his opponent's reflexes. Fast, but not as fast as some soldiers he had fought. Beside him, Grusha used her net to tangle another gladiator's sword, then followed up with a quick slash that opened a cut on the man's arm. They fell into the rhythm they had discussed, moving in coordination. When Adrian attacked high, Grusha covered low. When she moved forward, he protected her flanks. The gladiators quickly realized they were facing opponents who fought as a true unit, and they adjusted their tactics, trying to separate Adrian and Grusha through coordinated rushes. But Adrian and Grusha had one advantage the gladiators did not expect: desperation born of genuine care. Every time a gladiator tried to isolate one of them, the other fought with such ferocity to prevent it that the gladiators were forced back. Adrian took a cut to his shoulder, protecting Grusha from a flanking attack. Grusha returned the favor moments later, her blade deflecting a thrust that would have taken Adrian in the side. The fight was exhausting, a constant dance of blades and shields and movement. Adrian's wounds from the previous day reopened, blood soaking through his bandages. Grusha took a heavy blow to the ribs that left her gasping. But they did not break, did not separate, did not give up. One of the gladiators, a massive man with a battle axe, made a mistake. He overcommitted to a swing at Grusha, and she rolled under it with orcish agility, coming up to drive both her blades into his lower back. The man fell with a scream, and suddenly the odds were 5 against 2. The crowd's noise changed, becoming more excited, more invested. Adrian risked a quick glance and saw more white ribbons appearing, more people standing to cheer for the unlikely pair who refused to die. The gladiators regrouped, their confidence shaken. They had expected this to be easy, a simple execution dressed up as combat. Instead, they were in a real fight, and they had already lost one of their number. Adrian used their moment of hesitation to press an attack, his gladius moving in the precise patterns drilled into him during his army training. He drove one gladiator back, until the man stumbled over the corpse of the bear that had not yet been removed from the arena. Adrian's blade found the gap under the man's arm, and he fell, 4 against 2 now. Grusha fought with a fury that was beautiful and terrible to watch, her blades flashing in the sunlight, her movements powerful and graceful at once. She was everything the crowd thought orcs were: savage and strong, but also everything they thought orcs were not: skilled and honorable. Another gladiator fell to their combined assault, Adrian distracting him while Grusha delivered the killing blow. The remaining 3 gladiators looked at each other, and Adrian saw the calculation in their eyes. They were professionals. They knew when a fight was turning against them. But they also knew the Baron's wrath if they retreated. One of the gladiators, older than the others with scars that told of a long career, called out to Adrian, "You fight well, prisoner, better than you should. Where did you learn? King's army, Adrian replied, circling slowly, his eyes never leaving the three men. 10th Regiment border campaigns, and you, mercenary companies all across the Western territories. The gladiator spit blood into the sand. This is a bad way to die, fighting prisoners in an arena for a baron's amusement. Then do not die, Adrian said. Throw down your weapons. Tell the baron you were bested, live to fight another day. For a moment the arena held its breath. The older gladiator looked at his two companions, then at Adrian and Grusha, then up at the baron's box. Whatever he saw in Baron Helmuth's face made his jaw tighten. Cannot do that, the gladiator said. He would kill our families, same as your guard friend risks by showing you mercy. We all of us dance on the baron's strings. Then I am sorry, Adrian said, and he meant it. These men were not evil, just trapped in the same system that had trapped him and Grusha. The final exchange was brief and brutal. The three gladiators came at them in a coordinated rush, and this time there was no holding back, no testing. It was kill or be killed. Adrian took a sword thrust through the meat of his thigh, but managed to deflect it from hitting anything vital. Grusha screamed, a raw sound of rage and pain as a blade opened a long cut across her back. But her net caught two of the gladiators together, tangling their weapons, and Adrian was there with the gladius, ending it quickly. The last gladiator, the old one, faced them alone. He was breathing hard, blood running from a dozen small wounds. Adrian and Grusha were not in much better shape, both swaying on their feet, but they stood together and the gladiator stood alone. Make it quick, the old gladiator said quietly. I am tired. Adrian gave him a quick death, a soldier's mercy. As the man fell, the arena erupted in noise, but this time it was different. The crowd was not roaring for blood, they were cheering, stamping their feet, waving those white ribbons with wild enthusiasm. They had witnessed something unexpected, something that spoke to a deeper hunger than simple violence. They had seen courage and loyalty and partnership that transcended the barriers that usually divided human from orc. Adrian dropped his gladius and shield and turned to Grusha. She was pale under her green skin, her wounds serious. He caught her as her knees buckled, holding her upright. We did it, Grusha whispered. We actually did it. We did it together, Adrian said. He looked up at the baron's box and saw Helmuth's face twisted with an emotion Adrian could not quite read. Anger, certainly, but also calculation. The baron was a showman above all else, and he had just witnessed his prisoners become crowd favorites. That complicated things. Baron Helmuth stood, raising his hands for silence. Slowly the crowd quieted. A remarkable display, the baron's voice boomed across the arena. I confess, I did not expect such skill from mere prisoners. The people have spoken with their support, and I am not so cruel as to ignore their will. You have earned a reprieve, not freedom, but life. You will be returned to the cells, given food and medical care, and in 1 month's time you will fight again. If you continue to please the crowd, perhaps we can discuss more permanent arrangements. It was not freedom, but it was more than Adrian had dared hope for. A month was a lifetime in a place like this. A month to plan, to heal, to look for opportunities. He nodded once to the baron, then helped Grusha limp toward the gate where guards waited to take them back to the cells. The month that followed was strange and difficult and unexpectedly hopeful. Adrian and Grusha were moved to better cells, given adequate food, and allowed time together to train for their next appearance. The baron, ever the showman, had decided that their partnership could be profitable, and he began promoting them as the unlikely champions, the human and the orc who fought as one. In the quiet hours between training sessions, Adrian and Grusha talked about everything. She told him of her childhood in the mountain clans, of learning to hunt with her father, of the day she had first seen humans and been struck by how similar their families seemed to orc families, despite all the stories she had been told. He told her of his own childhood on a farm, of joining the army to escape a life of poverty, of the friends he had made and lost, of his gradual disillusionment with a war that seemed to have no real purpose beyond feeding hatred. "You think it will ever change?" Grusha asked one evening as they sat in the training yard, watching the sun set through the bars. "The way humans and orcs see each other, I do not know," Adrian said honestly, "but I think it has to start with individuals. With one human and one orc looking past the stories and the fears and seeing each other as people, like we do." Grusha leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture that had become natural between them. "When we get out of here, and we will get out of here, where will we go? Neither of us has a home anymore." "Then we make one," Adrian said. "Find some piece of land on the frontier where no one cares about human or orc, just about surviving and building something. Maybe that is naive, but I have to believe it is possible." "I like that idea," Grusha said softly. "A home. Our home." The feelings between them had deepened over the month into something neither could deny. They had not named it yet, both perhaps afraid that speaking it aloud would somehow jinx their chances of survival. But it was there in every look, every touch, every quiet moment together. Their second fight in the arena was against a pack of dire wolves, and they dispatched them with such efficiency that the crowd's enthusiasm only grew. Their third fight, 2 weeks later, was against another team of gladiators, and again they emerged victorious. With each win, the crowd's love for them intensified, and the Baron's mood grew more complicated. Garrett, the guard who had shown them that first mercy, had become an ally. He passed them information about the Baron's household, about the schedules of the guards, about which servants might be sympathetic. Adrian and Garrett spoke in whispers during the times when Garrett was assigned to their cell block. "The Baron is growing nervous," Garrett confided one night. "You have become too popular. People in the town are talking about you, making you folk heroes. Some are even saying that if a human and an orc can work together so well, perhaps the border wars are pointless. The Baron does not like that kind of talk. It is bad for business and bad for keeping people divided and distracted." "What do you think he will do?" Adrian asked. "I think he will try to make your next fight your last, one way or another. Either you die and become martyrs, which is safer for him, or he has to deal with the problem of two popular prisoners who are making people question things they should not question. Then we need to escape before that next fight," Adrian said. "Garrett, I know I am asking a lot, but is there any way—" "I have been thinking about that," Garrett interrupted. He glanced around nervously, then continued in a barely audible whisper. "3 nights from now, there is a changing of the guard at midnight. If someone were to start a fire in the kitchen stores, it would draw most of the guards away from the cell blocks. And if someone were to leave a set of keys where they might be found, and if the gate to the outer courtyard happened to have a broken lock that looked secure but was not well, prisoners determined enough might find a way out." Adrian stared at the guard, scarcely believing what he was hearing. "Why would you do this? If you are caught, they will execute you." "Because I am tired of being part of something shameful," Garrett said simply. "I was a soldier once. I stood for something. Working for the Baron, keeping prisoners for his entertainment, beating people who have done nothing wrong. That is not soldiering, that is being a thug. When I saw you two in that arena, fighting not just for yourselves but for each other, it reminded me what courage looks like. Consider it my way of finding a piece of my own honor again. If we get out, come with us," Adrian urged. "You said you have a family. Bring them. We will go somewhere the Baron cannot reach." Garrett shook his head. My wife's family is here and she will not leave them. But knowing I helped you escape will be enough. Just promise me something, promise me you will build that home you talk about. Show people that humans and orcs can live together in peace. That is worth more than anything I could do here. Adrian gripped the guard's arm. I promise. And Garrett, thank you for everything. The next 3 days were agonizing. Adrian and Grusha prepared in secret, hoarding food from their meals, fashioning crude packs from torn bedding, planning their route. Grusha knew the northern mountains well, and if they could reach them, her knowledge of the wilderness would give them a chance to disappear. On the night of the escape, Adrian lay awake in his cell, every nerve taut. He and Grusha had been separated for the night. The Baron had instituted a new rule that they only be together during training, perhaps sensing that their bond had grown beyond what was useful to him. Adrian stared at the ceiling and counted his heartbeats, waiting for the signal. The smell of smoke came first, drifting through the corridors. Then shouts, the sound of running feet, the organized chaos of guards responding to an emergency. Adrian waited, forcing himself to be patient until the sounds had moved away toward the kitchen wing. Then he felt along the base of his cell door where Garrett had said the keys would be. His fingers closed around cold iron, and his heart leaped. He unlocked his cell as quietly as possible and slipped into the corridor. Grusha emerged from her cell at almost the same moment, her eyes bright in the darkness. They did not speak, just reached for each other's hands and moved quickly through the corridors toward the route Garrett had described. The prison complex was a maze, but Garrett's directions were precise. They encountered no guards until they reached the outer courtyard, and there they found Garrett himself standing watch. Quickly now, Garrett whispered. He pointed to a gate that looked secure but which, Adrian now saw, had a lock that was barely hanging on. The fire will not distract them much longer. Once you are through, head north into the forest. Do not stop, do not look back, just run. Thank you, Grusha said, and there were tears in her eyes. You are a good man, Garrett. So is he, Garrett said, nodding at Adrian. Take care of each other. Make your home. Make it count. Adrian and Grusha slipped through the gate into the cold night air. Freedom was a scent Adrian had almost forgotten, the smell of pine and earth and possibility. They ran, holding hands, their feet finding purchase on the rocky ground. Behind them, shouts went up as the escape was discovered, but by then they were among the trees, disappearing into the darkness. They ran until dawn, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and Helmuth's hold. When the sun finally rose, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, they were deep in the forest, miles from any road or settlement. Only then did they stop, collapsing against a fallen log, gasping for air. We did it, Adrian said, and he started to laugh, giddy with exhaustion and relief. We actually did it. We are free. Grusha was laughing too, tears streaming down her face. I never thought, I never let myself truly hope. Adrian pulled her into his arms, and they held each other as the sun rose. Two unlikely souls who had found each other in the darkest of places and emerged into the light together. The weeks that followed were hard in a different way than their captivity had been. They moved carefully through the wilderness, avoiding settlements, living off what Grusha could hunt and what wild plants Adrian could identify. Slowly, they made their way north and east toward the mountains Grusha remembered. During the long days of travel, they talked about everything and nothing. The barriers that had existed between them, in the beginning the awareness of their different species, the weight of societal expectations, the fear of naming what they felt, all of those gradually fell away. What was left was simple and profound. Two people who had endured the worst and found in each other something worth surviving for. It was on a hillside overlooking a valley of wildflowers, with mountains rising blue and distant on the horizon, that Adrian finally said the words that had been building in his heart since that first desperate hour in adjacent cells. "I love you," he said, his voice carrying across the open space. "I love you, Grusha. Not because you saved my life or because we survived together, but because of who you are. Your courage, your kindness, your strength. I love you, and I want to build a life with you if you will have me." Grusha's eyes were bright with tears. She reached up and cupped his face with both hands, her touch gentle despite the calluses and scars. "I love you too, Adrian Zane. I think I have loved you since you stepped into that arena unarmed and I screamed your name and you looked at me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. I love you, and yes, I want to build a life with you. A home. A future." They kissed then under the open sky, with the wind carrying the scent of wildflowers and the mountains watching over them. It was a beginning, tentative and hopeful, of something new. They found their home in a high valley 2 weeks later, a place so remote that no human settlements were within a day's walk, and no orc clans claimed the territory. There was a stream for water, good soil for planting, and stands of timber for building. It was hard work, clearing land and constructing a cabin, but they were young and strong and motivated by a dream. As the cabin took shape, so did their life together. They fell into routines, learned each other's habits and preferences, had their first arguments and their first makings up. Grusha taught Adrian to track game through the forest, to read animal signs, to move silently through the underbrush. Adrian taught Grusha to read and write in the human script, to plan and build structures that would withstand winter storms, to cook the dishes his mother had made when he was a child. Their first winter in the valley was brutal, a test of everything they had built. Snow piled higher than the cabin's roof, and for weeks they were trapped inside with only each other for company. But those dark months also brought them closer, hours spent by the fire talking or reading aloud or simply sitting in comfortable silence. They made love for the first time during that winter, on a night when the cold was so fierce that they needed each other's warmth to survive. And what began as necessity transformed into something tender and profound and right. When spring came and the snow melted, revealing the valley green and new, Adrian and Grusha stood together outside their cabin and looked at what they had built. It was not much a small house, a cleared field, a garden plot waiting to be planted. But it was theirs, made by their hands, a home in the truest sense. "I want to marry you," Adrian said suddenly. "I know we do not have a priest or a clan elder, and I know our peoples would not recognize it even if we did. But I want to marry you, Grusha. I want to stand here in this valley we have made our own and make vows to you that I will keep for the rest of my life." Grusha turned to him, her face radiant. "In my clan, before I was exiled, marriages were made by choice and promise. Two people who wished to join their lives would stand before their families and speak their intentions, and if both spoke true, they were married in the eyes of the clan and the spirits. We have no families here to witness us, but we have the mountains and the sky and the land we have made our own. That is witness enough for me." So they married themselves, there in the spring sunshine, speaking vows they wrote themselves. Adrian promised to honor Grusha, to stand beside her through hardship and joy, to see her always as she truly was and not as the world might label her. Grusha promised to cherish Adrian, to fight for their home and their future, to be his partner in all things until death took one of them from the other. They had no rings, but Adrian wove a bracelet from wildflowers and placed it on Grusha's wrist, and she did the same for him, and they kissed as husband and wife for the first time. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. Adrian and Grusha expanded their home, adding rooms as they needed them, terracing the hillside for more gardens, building a barn for the goats and chickens. They eventually acquired through careful trading in distant settlements. They learned to navigate the complex politics of remaining hidden. Adrian would venture to human settlements when they needed things, keeping his marriage secret, while Grusha occasionally traded with orc hunting parties who passed through the mountains, never mentioning her human husband. It was a divided existence in some ways, maintaining two separate faces for two separate worlds. But in their valley, they were simply themselves, and that was enough. They had each other, and they had the home they had built, and they had the quiet satisfaction of knowing they were living proof that the divisions between their peoples were not insurmountable. 3 years after their escape, Grusha told Adrian she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. Neither knew what to expect from a half-orc, half-human child. Would it be healthy? Would it favor one parent over the other? How would it navigate a world that might reject it for being neither fully human nor fully orc? But when their daughter was born on a warm summer evening, with Adrian serving as midwife because they dared not bring anyone else to their hidden valley, all their fears evaporated in the face of overwhelming love. The baby was perfect, with Adrian's brown eyes and Grusha's green-tinged skin, tiny tusks just beginning to form, and a lusty cry that proclaimed her vitality. They named her Hope, because that was what she represented: hope that the future might be different, that love could bridge divides, that children could be born who belonged to both worlds and rejected the hatred of neither. Raising Hope brought new challenges and new joys. She grew quickly, strong like her mother but with her father's love of learning. Adrian taught her to read from the small collection of books they had managed to acquire, while Grusha taught her the ways of the forest and the traditions of the orc clans. Hope learned both languages, both cultures, becoming a bridge between two worlds even as she remained hidden from both. When Hope was 5 years old, a traveler stumbled upon their valley quite by accident, a young human woman fleeing an arranged marriage, desperate and alone. Adrian and Grusha debated long into the night what to do. Revealing themselves was a risk, but leaving her to die in the wilderness was not something either could countenance. They brought her to their home and nursed her back to health. The woman, whose name was Kara, was terrified at first to find herself in the care of an orc, but Hope's innocent acceptance and Adrian's calm reassurances eventually won her over. Kara stayed with them for 2 months, healing in body and spirit, and in that time she came to see what Adrian and Grusha had built. "This is not what I was taught to expect," Kara said one evening as they all sat around the dinner table, Hope chattering happily about a bird she had seen. "I was told orcs were monsters, that they could not think or feel like humans, but you are a family. A real family, no different from what I grew up with, except better because you chose each other. Will you tell people?" Grusha asked quietly. "When you leave here, will you speak of what you have seen?" Kara considered this carefully. "I think I will tell the truth, but carefully. Not to everyone. There are those who would use this knowledge to hurt you. But there are others, I think, who are tired of the wars and the hatred, who might be ready to hear that a different way is possible. May I tell those people when I find them?" Adrian and Grusha exchanged glances, then nodded. It was a risk, but perhaps a necessary one. They could not hide forever, and if their existence could help even a few people question the assumptions they had been raised with, it was worth the danger. Kara left their valley with food and supplies for her journey, and she kept her word. Over the years that followed, others came. 1 or 2 at a time, refugees from the wars, people fleeing persecution, those who were tired of hatred and seeking another way. Adrian and Grusha could not take them all in, but they helped where they could, directing some to other remote places, offering supplies and advice to others, slowly building a network of people who believed that humans and orcs could live in peace. Their valley became something of a legend in whispered conversations, a place where an impossible family lived proof that love could cross any divide. Some dismissed it as a fairy tale, but others, those who had seen too much suffering, held onto the story as a source of hope. Hope grew into a remarkable young woman, strong and kind and fiercely intelligent. She navigated the complexity of her heritage with a grace that astounded her parents, taking the best from both cultures and forging something new. On her 18th birthday, she told Adrian and Grusha that she wanted to leave the valley, to travel and meet more of the world, to perhaps help build bridges between humans and orcs in ways her parents could not. It was one of the hardest moments of their lives, letting her go. But they had raised her to be independent, to think for herself, to follow her conscience. They equipped her as well as they could with supplies and advice and blessings, and they watched from the edge of the valley as she walked down the mountain path, heading toward a future they could not predict. After Hope left, the valley seemed quieter, emptier. Adrian and Grusha were in their 40s now, their bodies bearing the marks of hard labor and old injuries. But they still had each other, and they still had the home they had built, and there was still work to be done. More refugees came, and Adrian and Grusha expanded their network, helping to establish other hidden settlements where humans and orcs could live together. It was slow work and dangerous, and for every success there were setbacks. But gradually, incrementally, things began to change. Word came through their network that Hope had made contact with a group of young orcs and humans who were working to establish formal peace in one of the border regions. She was using her unique heritage to serve as a mediator, speaking to both sides in their own languages, demonstrating through her very existence that coexistence was possible. Adrian and Grusha wept when they heard the news, proud beyond measure of the woman their daughter had become. On their 20th anniversary of arriving in the valley, Adrian and Grusha stood together on the hillside where they had first spoken their vows. They were older now, gray showing in Adrian's hair, Grusha's tusks more prominent, their hands scarred and calloused from 2 decades of work. But when they looked at each other, they saw the same people who had fought side by side in the arena, who had chosen each other over the expectations of their peoples, who had built something real and lasting from nothing but determination and love. "You have regrets?" Grusha asked, her hand in his. "If you could go back, knowing everything that would come, would you make the same choices?" Adrian did not hesitate. "Every single one. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Grusha. This life we have built together, the home we have made, the daughter we raised, the people we have helped, I would not trade any of it for an easier path." "Even the arena?" Grusha asked with a slight smile. "Even the fear and the pain and nearly dying, even that," Adrian confirmed. "Because it led me to you. Because it taught me that the walls between us and them are imaginary, maintained only by those who benefit from division. I learned that in a prison cell, talking to an orc woman who showed me more kindness than most humans I had known. Everything else followed from that." They kissed, there on the hillside under the familiar mountains, and renewed their vows to each other, speaking the same words they had spoken 20 years before. And in that moment, they were not human and orc, not divided by species or history or prejudice. They were simply two people who loved each other, who had chosen each other, who had built a life together that stood as testament to what was possible when love conquered fear. The years continued to pass. Hope came back to visit when she could, sometimes bringing friends humans and orcs working together toward peace. Adrian and Grusha met their grandchildren, Hope having married a human scholar who looked past her heritage to see her heart. The grandchildren were even more mixed in appearance than Hope, a beautiful blending that made categorization impossible and irrelevant. The network of hidden settlements continued to grow, and slowly, attitudes began to shift. It was not a revolution, not a sudden transformation, but a gradual change in the way some people thought about the old divisions. The border wars became less frequent, then stopped altogether in some regions. Trade began between human and orc settlements, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. Adrian and Grusha could not claim credit for all of this change. There were many factors, many brave people working toward peace. But they knew their story had played a part, that the tale of the human and the orc who had fought together in the arena and then built a home together had given people a different narrative to imagine. When Adrian was 62, he fell ill with a fever that would not break. Grusha nursed him through it with the same fierce determination she had shown in the arena 3 decades before, but they both knew his time was coming. Orcs lived longer than humans, and though Grusha was only in middle age by her people's standards, Adrian's body was wearing out. On a warm spring evening, with the windows open to let in the scent of wildflowers and the sound of the stream, Adrian lay in the bed they had shared for 30 years and held Grusha's hand. "I am not afraid," he told her. "I have lived a full life. I have loved and been loved. I have seen our daughter grow into someone extraordinary. I have watched you every day and counted myself blessed. I have no regrets." Grusha was crying, tears streaming down her face, but she smiled through them. "You were the best man I ever knew, Adrian Zane. You saw me as a person when everyone else saw only an orc. You stood beside me when no one else would. You built this home with me, this life, this proof that love matters more than fear. I will miss you every day until I join you." "Tell our story," Adrian said, his voice growing weaker. "Make sure people know. Not because we were special, but because we were not. We were just 2 people who chose love over hatred. If we could do it, anyone can. That is the message that matters." He died as the sun was setting, painting the valley in shades of gold and purple, his hand in Grusha's, his eyes on her face. It was a good death, as deaths go, peaceful and without regret. Grusha buried him on the hillside where they had spoken their vows, under a tree they had planted together in their first year. She carved a marker with her own hands, working the stone with tools Adrian had made, inscribing it with words in both the human and orcish scripts. "Here lies Adrian Zane, who loved across boundaries and built a home from hope." She lived for many more years after that, watching the world continue to change, watching their grandchildren grow up in a world slightly more accepting than the one she and Adrian had been born into. She told their story to anyone who would listen, and she continued the work they had begun together, helping refugees and building connections between communities. When Grusha finally died at the age of 87, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of both human and orcish heritage, her last words were Adrian's name, spoken with all the love and longing of someone about to be reunited with the other half of her soul. They buried her beside Adrian on the hillside, under the same tree with a marker that matched his. "Here lies Grusha, who fought for love and proved that home is built by hearts, not by blood." The valley remained, as did the cabin, maintained by their descendants as a symbol and a sanctuary. Over the generations, it became a place of pilgrimage for those who believed in the possibility of peace between humans and orcs, a tangible reminder that the divisions between peoples are not natural or inevitable, but chosen, and therefore can be unchosen. And in towns and villages, in orc clan gatherings and human taverns, The story was told and retold, changing slightly with each telling but always maintaining its core truth. Once there was a human man who stepped unarmed into a fighting pit, and an orc woman who screamed his name, and from that desperate moment grew a love that changed the world.